Words from Daddy's Mouth by Lily Burgess. Book 1, The Big Rusty Nail. Do you remember how I had to repeat Year 6 because I broke my right arm? Asked Dad. Jazz and Stephanie nodded, recalling the story. Actually, I broke my left arm too. I broke my right arm first. Then a few weeks after it had healed, I broke my left arm. So for about 6 months, all I could do at school was play lemonade stand on the computer. Back then, our school only had one computer. It was an Apple II. Can you believe it? One computer for the whole school. Just one. For 600 kids. Dad put his right arm in front of him, miming a broken arm, and then pretended to press keys on an imaginary keyboard with his left fingers. Then he changed his mime to his left arm being broken and tapped on the imaginary keyboard with his right hand. Jazz giggled, and Dad finished his mime act. Now these days, you call your computer a Mac, Dad said. Our school computer was a very early version of a Mac, an Apple Macintosh II. Dad paused, thinking. Year 6 is the last year of primary school. Being the oldest kids in the school, our year level had special responsibilities. Guess what I was responsible for? Dad paused again, but Stephanie and Jazz remained silent, waiting to hear what Dad would say. Actually, come to think of it, Dad went on, I was responsible for 4 things. First, I was captain of one of the sports teams. Our team was called Simpson, and our team colour was red. I made a huge flag out of a triangular piece of bright red material. I painted Simpson on it in big, bold letters using white paint. Then I attached the flag to a long wooden pole. I think it might have been an old broom handle. I would take it to all the sports carnivals and wave it like this. Dad stood up and waved his arms back and forth while swaying his whole body, demonstrating how he used to hold the flag. That was my first responsibility. My second was to be a library monitor. I checked that everyone brought their books back to the library. This was a great job, especially when I got to miss some lessons. Mum shook her head. My third responsibility was to be the captain of the school soccer team. I was a pretty good soccer player, although that is a story for another day. Dad quickly glanced at Mum, who was rolling her eyes. Dad continued. Soccer was my favourite sport, but I also participated in cross-country running, cricket, softball, British Bulldogs 1, 2, 3, and brandings. Mum rolled her eyes again. Okay, British Bulldogs 1, 2, 3 and brandings are not really sports, but they were lots of fun. Come to think of it, brandings was not something I was particularly good at, given that I broke my left arm while playing it. That reminds me of another story that also happened that year, the day I had to play soccer in my red undies. But that is a story for another day. Finally, my fourth responsibility, and this is what this story is about, was to be a sports room monitor. Do you know what a sports room monitor does? Jazz and Stephanie shrugged their shoulders. A sports monitor runs the whole sports room, Dad announced proudly. Can you believe it? Our sports room was about the size of the storeroom next to your hall at school, about 3 metres by 4 metres. Dad stood up and paced out the size of the sports room, then returned to his seat. This room with all the sports equipment was run by the students. When a student wanted to borrow something, we would write down all the details in a book, the date and time, the person's name and class they were in, and the equipment they borrowed. It was a super fun job. Steph and Jazz, can you guess what sort of equipment we had? Jazz and Stephanie shrugged their shoulders again. There were cricket balls, bats and stumps, baseball bats, gloves and balls. We had soccer balls, footballs, tennis balls and handballs. However, some of the best items were these really bouncy balls. They were very popular. Like mine? Stephanie asked. Very similar, Steph. The balls were about the same size as your miniature netball, Dad said. But they were made out of a really rubbery, very bouncy material. From memory, they were bright blue or red. The kids loved them because you could throw them very far and kick them really, really hard. That reminds me. We used to play a game where everyone had to stand in a circle with one person on the outside with a bouncy ball. Then we took turns to throw the ball into the circle. The aim was to try and hit someone. When someone was hit, they had to stand outside the circle. "Fun," said Jazz. "It was such fun," mused Dad. But back to the story. Oh, I forgot we had other equipment too. Skipping ropes, small ones and really big ones. Medicine balls, which are balls that are very, very heavy. Even a parachute. A real parachute. It was really great equipment. "What about hula hoops?" asked Jazz. "Yes, I forgot about them too," Dad smiled. So we had all of those things in the sports room. Then Dad remembered something else, and he added, "We also had one of those big mattresses for landing on when you do high jump. It was a gigantic mattress, and it needed about 20 kids to drag it around." Jazz and Stephanie looked bewildered by this. So Dad tried again and said, "Imagine 20 little kids pushing a mattress about the size of a rubbish truck." Jazz, Stephanie and Mum all cracked up with laughter at the thought. "Okay, back to the story," Dad continued. "There would be at least 2 of us in the equipment room, sometimes 3. The school rule was that kids were not allowed to go to the sports room to borrow the equipment until 10 minutes after the first lunch bell had rung. This meant the kids only had about half an hour to borrow and use the equipment." "That is not a lot of time," said Jazz. "No, it is not. What would happen, Jazz," Dad continued, "is when we opened up the door to the sports room, there would be a very long queue. Kids would be lined up as far as we could see. Everyone would be shouting, 'What about me? Pick me! Pick me! What's going on? I really want to get my stuff. Help me! Help me!' So there was a big rush to get the equipment out of the sports room. That is why we took turns writing up the information in the exercise book and running around the sports room finding the equipment. It was very tiring." "Which job did you like doing most?" Stephanie asked. "I liked taking the names," stated Dad, "and you will soon find out why." He grinned at Mum. You see, there was something rather odd beside the big mattress. I am still not sure exactly what it was. It was a big triangular piece of wood, and it had lots of wooden spikes coming out of it that were about 20 centimetres long. But the whole thing was falling apart. It was taller than me. Stephanie stood up. "This tall?" she demonstrated, stretching her arms up as high as she could. "Yes," agreed Dad, "about 2 metres high." He paused for a moment. Now that I think about it, it was probably intended to hang up quoits and similar stuff like hula hoops. That is most likely why it had spikes poking out of it, to hang stuff on. But back when I was a kid, I did not understand what it was about because we did not use it. It just sat right in the middle of the equipment room, wedged against the mattress, with no obvious purpose. Do you remember what I told you about how the equipment went out of the room? Stephanie and Jazz both shouted, "In a big rush!" Well, when it came back in, it was in an even bigger rush. We would try and put it all away quickly so we also had some time to play before the end of lunch. Actually, even if we were running late, we would play around after the lunch bell had rung. Then, when we were late for class, we would say to the teachers, "I'm a sports monitor," and they would assume it must have been a busy lunchtime. Best of all, we did not get into trouble. It was a pretty cool gig. Stephanie and Jazz looked at each other and giggled, while Mum grimaced. To tidy up, we had to put all the equipment back where it belonged. Remember those bouncy balls I talked about earlier? They had to be returned to some shelving right up near the roof. Unfortunately, the shelf was too high for us to reach, so instead we would throw the balls and try to get them to land on the shelves. Looking back on it, this was not a very good idea, especially as they would bounce all over the place. If you threw a ball really hard, it would bounce about and hit another kid, sometimes on their head. Really, it was quite dangerous. Although sometimes it was fun when it would bounce near the mattress, We could do a Superman dive onto the mattress and shout, "Yes, what a catch!" Again Mum grimaced. Now, on this particular day, when we opened the sports room, we discovered that the monitors from the previous day had not finished tidying up. The room was a mess. There was equipment all over the place. In particular, those bouncy balls were everywhere, including one that was stuck between the mattress and the wooden thing with the spikes. That day everyone wanted a bouncy ball, and before long we had lent out all the balls, except for the one that was stuck. Then a kid comes along who really wants one of those balls. He became very cranky and threatened to dob on us to the teachers for not getting him a ball. This day it was my job to collect the equipment. The other sports monitors shouted, "Hey, Matt!" That's me. "Get that ball out," pointing to the ball that was stuck. We were already late, so I rushed over and I looked down between the mattress and the big wooden thing. I could see where the ball was stuck, so I put my arm straight down like this. Dad stood up to demonstrate. Then he bent over and put his arm straight down as if reaching into a tight spot. I grabbed the ball, but at the same time something scratched my arm. "One of the wooden spikes!" screamed Jazz. "Worse," winced Dad. It was a big nail. A big, rusty nail. Mum shuddered, while Stephanie and Jazz gasped. "But there is more," Dad continued. It was quite gloomy in the equipment room, and because I was going down arm first into the gap, I could not see the nail sticking out. Next thing I knew, I could feel something digging into my arm. I thought, "Oh, what is that?" Then my arm started to hurt, a lot. I moved a little and saw the rusty nail in the big wooden thing sticking into my arm. The nail was so rusty. It reminds me of how rusty my car floor was. So rusty that my foot hit the ground when I tried to put on the brake. "Whoa," said Jazz. Anyway, back to the story. The big rusty nail was stuck deep into my arm, and I started to try and pull my arm out. But there was a bigger problem about to happen. I pulled my arm up at the wrong angle. The next thing I knew, the nail started going in even deeper. Do you know what I felt then? Stephanie and Jazz froze. I felt the nail hit the bone in my arm. Dad said, looking slightly pale, while Mum giggled. "Whoa!" shrieked Jazz. Then I started screaming. My arm hurt so much. Actually, the scar is still on my arm. Dad showed his arm to Jazz and Stephanie. "Can you see that, girls?" he asked. "Yes," said Jazz. "It is tiny now," Dad explained, "but you can see that white line on my arm. That is the scar." Steph and Jazz were starting to look pale as well, so Dad got back to the story. "Do you know what happened when I pulled my arm out? Do you know what I could see?" "The bone?" gasped Stephanie. "Yes," said Dad, "the bone and the flesh inside my arm. Just this white stuff. It was totally white." Dad paled further as he remembered what the bone looked like, while Mum chuckled. "Ew," shuddered Stephanie. Then something else started to happen. Dad was now turning green, while Mum continued to giggle. Stephanie and Jasmine were speechless. Dad bravely continued. Suddenly, the white flesh turned into the brightest red blood, about the same colour as the Simpson flag. Then blood started pouring out. There was a lot of blood. It was gushing out everywhere. "Oh, I can still feel the pain now," Dad shivered. I quickly gathered some tissues from my pocket and pushed them into the hole in my arm. I was in so much pain, but I refused to cry. I could hear my friend saying, "Hey, Matt, what's wrong? Hurry up and get that ball. What are you doing?" I went over and showed them my arm. I said, "Look at this. Look at my arm." "Ew," they said, and then, "Oh my goodness." Do you know what they then said to me? Well, the boy who wanted the ball said, "You'd better not tell anyone." Can you believe it? All I could think was that I was going to have to tell someone. It hurt a lot, and I was in danger with that deep cut and blood going everywhere. Plus, someone else might get hurt on the big wooden thing. It would be irresponsible not to tell someone at least about the rusty nail. My friends and I patched my arm up as best we could with an old clean cloth we found in a cupboard. We did not tell the teachers about what had happened to me because we hoped the bleeding would stop at some stage. However, we did tell the PE stands for physical education teacher, that we had, by chance, noticed that there were some big rusty nails sticking out of the big wooden thing in the sports room. Do you know what the teacher said? He said he did not know why the school had that wooden thing, or why it was in the sports room. "It is always getting in the way," he said. "We should throw it out." So they did. The school threw out the big wooden thing with the wooden spikes and big rusty nails. Can you believe it? So it did not hurt anyone ever again. And although the sore on my arm was there for a very long time, it did eventually heal and just left the scar as a reminder. "Ew," said Stephanie and Jazz in unison.